Well, hello and welcome back to today's yoga question. I'm Lizzie Lasater. Joining us is Erica Morton Magill, who is our professor for the day about exhaustion. Today we're talking about exhaustion. So, Erica, what is the story with exhaustion?
Yeah. So I think that we tend to always think of humans tend to think of ours as the most exhausted age. And we have a lot of metaphors and phrases to describe our exhaustion. I think that the current phrases, and maybe you can add to this, Lizzie, we talk about burnout, we talk about stress, we talk about fatigue, we talk about chronic fatigue syndrome, but we tend to forget that there have always in every era been moments of exhaustion, and that these expressions of exhaustion are ways to talk about things that we're afraid of, all of our fears, the pace at which life is moving, and our inability to keep up, or in some instances, fears about the loss of religion. So I was sharing with you, Lizzie, before we started recording, there's a really wonderful book called Exhaustion, A History that I've been reading. And the author speaks about Celestine V, who was a pope in 1294, who resigned, citing exhaustion, physical exhaustion, spiritual exhaustion. He was done. He was exhausted and wanted to excuse himself from the papacy. And I think that's really important to keep in mind, because I think that there have always been ways in which we're exhausted, ways in which we're tired. It has been expressed in different ways, sometimes a spiritual failing or a moral failure, but that ours is not the only exhausted age. Ours is not the only exhausted era.
How do you think about exhaustion in your own life? Have you been reframing that concept of, so you're working on your master's thesis
Yeah.
on Savasana.
Yeah.
And the pandemic upended many of our lives. Have you been reframing your relationship with exhaustion through this work with Shavasana?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I have, and I've also been looking at other people's exhaustion, at our collective exhaustion, at our collective frustration and fed upness, for lack of a better word, just sort of throwing our hands up in the air and saying enough. And I think one of the ways that's really powerful that we're finding to say enough, I'm exhausted, is to lie down. So we're seeing a rise in restorative yoga, and a lot of teachers talking about restorative yoga here in the United States. There's been so many books published in the last few years about the power of lying down. I don't know if you're familiar with Dr. Gail Parker, restorative yoga for race-based and ethnic-based stress and trauma. And I think that's a really powerful reclamation of our right to lie down. If you are exhausted, if you feel like you've had enough, what are other ways? Because this isn't a sustainable way to live. And I think a lot of us felt that when the pandemic hit. It was like, oh, this wasn't ever sustainable. This way that I was moving wasn't actually tenable. So what are other ways that I can look at this? What are other ways that I can move through?
I love that idea. This statistic jumped out at me today that the average Instagram user spends 50 minutes on Instagram a day. And I just did a thought experiment for myself, like, oh, okay, what would my life look like a year from now if I spent 50 minutes hiking or
Yeah.
meditating or
Yeah.
cooking super like homemade foods, or pick anything really that is more uplifting than Instagram, more really for my full body, full human being wellness. And I think there is that sense for me, as I've examined my exhaustion as a twin mom, there is still a lot of sort of responsibility I have to take for the choices that I make that lead to my exhaustion. It's like,
Yeah.
having a couple glasses of wine with a girlfriend. It's like, and then the next day, yeah, I'm exhausted. Okay. So what is, I think, an interesting question to ask ourselves when we examine our relationship with exhaustion is like, what is self-created? What is imposed on me? And we all live in varying, and that's a sliding scale depending on the incoming from the outside world. And many of us, exactly like there's levels of privilege that totally feed into this. There's
Yeah.
multifactorial.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what you're speaking to is this idea of sort of what is contracting my choices and constricting my options, and where is there sort of an expansion, and where is there an opening up. And we do all have small, there's always choice, right? And those are intersecting and different based on your circumstances. But where is the choice, and where does that lie? And how can I breathe space into that
All
choice?
right. I love that. I love that frame. So as we close this question, what is one actionable sort of everyday habit or practice or mantra that you have found valuable for yourself in your relationship with your exhaustion?
Yeah, that's exactly it. And I do ask myself that on a daily, sometimes hourly basis. Is this causing me to constrict and close down, or do I feel an expansion? And if I have, if there's no other choice but to do this, how can I find a little bit more space within this avenue? And I ask myself that really regularly. And I find that it's changed my relationship to exhaustion, because I think exhaustion also expresses not just a physical or mental breakdown, it also sort of expresses a dissatisfaction, right? And so it's kind of about the attitude that I take to it. It's like, what is causing me exhaustion? Is it external? Is it internal? Is it the outpacing of what I feel are my personal energy reserves, and what's being asked of me, and where can I sort of, almost like, I know you're a swimmer, right? Like as you push the water away, like where can I make a little bit more space?
Yes, and I will close with one book recommendation. Have you read 4,000 Weeks, Time
Mm-mm.
Management for Mortals? He really
No.
talks about like this sort of witty British guy. I really like the tone of the book, and it's not really about time management. It's about letting go of the myth of time management. But he really talks about it's quite probable that you just have too much on your plate. Like your goals are unrealistic, and especially with these things like email or even laundry. Like one of my mantra recently has been, laundry is never finished. Even
Yeah.
when I die, there will be dirty laundry.
100%. I mean, so one of my mantras is also, is it enough? Right? Like,
Mhm.
not is it perfect, not
Yeah.
is it like fabulous, shiny, I'm gonna win the Olympics, but like, is it
Is it
enough?
enough? Is it enough? Okay, we're going to leave you with that question. Tell us where we can find you and all of the wonderful things you're doing on the internet.
So you can find my website at yogafolk.co. You can link to my social and blog that way, but I also write bi-weekly newsletter that's at yogafolk.blog.
So the newsletter is the same. That's what I'm subscribed to, right? That's on
Yep.
Substack. Okay.
Newsletter, blog. Yeah.
Wonderful. Okay.
Written
I'm here, Lizzie Lasater, Lizzie.yoga, just Lizzie.yoga. You can find everything that I'm doing there. Thank you for
Thank you.
being here.